Welcome to the February 10th meeting of the Town Council and Parking Authority. At this time, I'd like to remind those in attendance to please turn off the ringers on your cell phones and other communication devices. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Thank you and good evening. Councilmember Diane McNutt.
Here.
Councilmember Barbara Spector.
Here.
Councilmember Joe Przinski.
Here.
Vice Mayor Marcia Jensen.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Steve Leonardis.
Here. We have no pledge leader this evening, but I would like to invite everybody to join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This evening, we're going to do verbal communications on anything not on the agenda, as well as anything that may be on the agenda, all at one time. So if you'd like to speak, please fill out a speaker card found in the chairs in front of you. And we're going to move right into that. The first speaker being Jonathan Knowles.
Evening, Mr. Mayor, council members. My name is Jonathan Knowles, and I am the president of the Los Gatos Montesino Police Foundation, a nonprofit community service organization based of entirely volunteers. The foundation receives no money from the police department, no money from the town. We raise funds. By providing additional funding, we assist in maintaining the high quality of life and the low crime rate that residents, businesses, and visitors of Los Gatos enjoy. There was an item recently mentioned in the press, the suggestion that we consider outsourcing all of our police services, outsourcing our entire police department. And what a buzz that has created. Not since the attempt to stop our new library from opening have I heard from more people, more than any other issue, even the ones we've had recently, and we've had some doozies here. Those have been very polarizing. This one has not. People have been asking over and over again, really? Would we even consider that? The voice of the people is clear on this topic. This is not where we should be focusing when it comes to cutting town spending. I believe that by far the majority of residents of Los Gatos and Montesino, where this thought was put forward a couple of years ago and went down overwhelmingly, I believe that the majority of our residents would agree. We have it real good here in our fine town. Despite rising costs and budget cuts, the town of Los Gatos is still among the safest cities of their size in the United States. The community connection our department has is envied by most municipalities in the state, and that is not an exaggeration. I have personally spent time with the chiefs of many of them. As a matter of fact, the California Police Chiefs Association leadership meets here in Los Gatos. Our department has become a nationally and internationally recognized agency that has an exemplary track record of policing through innovative approaches to crime prevention and crime solving, recruiting and developing outstanding staff, leadership that applies strategic thinking to the evolving role of policing and police community connections. 3 minutes is not enough time for me to continue this list. Their record speaks for itself. We, the residents of Los Gatos, value the exceptional police department we rely on every day. Mr. Mayor, council members, as you hold the lens to the books, focus elsewhere. Do not outsource the safety and security of our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Knowles. Next speaker is Tim Harris.
Hi there. My name is Tim Harris, and would like to speak to the same topic Jonathan did. I'm also a member of the Police Foundation. We have my family has a fairly wide perspective. We've lived all over the world in many different states, and I have to say that we've experienced living in communities where we have apathetic police or bad police, and I think that we have it really good here in Los Gatos. I think we've all chosen to live here in Los Gatos for a variety of reasons. Good schools, very nice town, prosperous, very safe, very good police. And I think that a lot of time and effort has gone into developing the police. And frankly, what convinced me to join the Police Foundation was the police management's view of serving the public, not just serving the public, but knowing the public, preferably knowing all of the citizens. And you compare and contrast that to some of the other local agencies, and it's just a night and day difference. So I've been CEO of a number of different companies. As I say, we've lived all over the world. One thing I have learned in a lot of years, too many years maybe in business, is that outsourcing your core competencies is a really bad idea. And I do think that with the values we have and the life we have here in Los Gatos, the police department is one of the town's core competencies. And outsourcing that is just a really bad idea. And I would urge really it not even be discussed, because I think nothing good can come of it. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Next speaker, Jeff Lowridge.
Hi, my name is Jeff Lockridge from 109 Paseo Laura, Los Gatos. Well, if I remember correctly, Councilwoman McNutt questioned the staff last week whether a previously approved and implemented plan like the Albright Way development could actually be submitted as an initiative for the ballot. Tonight, I'm suggesting that the town submit an all-new proposition which would be based on the already approved Town Ordinance 2216, currently in effect. If that same plan were submitted in the form of a specific plan, similar to the developer's initiative, it would actually be a completely different plan from what was approved, yet be substantially similar. I'm not a lawyer, but I think that by changing the existing version of the Albright Way plan from a plan development to a specific plan with normal town oversight, there should be enough differences so that actually a whole new proposition was being proposed. It would also render any pending litigation moot. If an environmental impact report was necessary, the existing EIR should suffice, since the environmental part of the plan would be unchanged. The high-priced lawyers that the developer hired are definitely engaged in a hostile takeover of the town's sovereignty. It's one thing to want to build in Los Gatos, it's another thing to alter the town's oversight of what is built. The developer seeks to take away your ability to decide if what they want is acceptable. They could just have easily worded their initiative to allow the normal town oversight, but they didn't. At last week's meeting, their lawyer actually stated that the initiative is exactly the same as the approved plan. Well, you're in a position to disprove that. I'm also confident that once the report is available, you too will see the differences. But time is short. The town council version of an initiative needs to be drafted and approved by March 3rd. This allows for the mandatory 88-day lead time that Special Election Code 9222 requires. I hope that the town council can see what it means for the future of our town and the planning process, and also see what damage big money is capable of doing. A town council initiative should be submitted for the June ballot. There are just too many differences between what was approved by town council and what will be allowed if this ballot measure passes. Please allow voters to decide from an informed position and with two choices how they wish to vote on these plans. Please use your authority under Election Code Section 9222 to submit a new initiative. Also, by introducing a new ballot measure, the town council would reassert its authority in land use matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lowridge. Next speaker is Lee Quintana.
Excuse me, Lee Quintana, 5 Palm Avenue. I'm probably going to be a little bit more disorganized than usual because I just got off a plane having to remake my reservations 3 times to get through the weather windows to get back between the snow and the freezing rain. Anyway, I'd like to talk a little bit about Albright, not much because I think other people are going to talk about it. But I am curious about what the difference between an initiative and a referendum are, because in the state constitution, they're defined differently. Yet the Albright initiative uses the term, I believe, rescind the existing legislation. Looking it up in the dictionary under legal terms, rescind and repeal are essentially the same thing, and yet an initiative, as far as I have been able to read so far, does not include repealing something. I'd also like to ask a question of the attorney. In the Albright specific plan, it says that the specific plan and zoning being proposed is covered by the environmental document for the existing approved project. And I know that initiatives don't require environmental review. I don't know if that is the same for town council initiated initiatives. And even if it is, would it be covered by the existing environmental, since it covers the initiative, which is even broader than, or they're saying, which is even broader than what our approved project is. Whoops. I guess I didn't get to the other thing. Sorry. Do I have to? Oh, I still have time. Sorry. That's my questions on that. On the North 40, I noted that the schedule doesn't have the North 40 being finished or coming to council and commission until the summer. And I was wondering why that was, and if there was a way to expedite it, since it's been going through the process for so long and has attempted to follow the rules on its way there. And then I have two other things that I'm just going to mention. One is a question of thinking about looking at revising the demolition ordinance, because I think the purpose is to avoid demolitions or discourage them, but I think practically every project that hits the Planning Commission is a demolition. And lastly, revise the zoning code.
Thank you. Next speaker is Barbara Dodson.
Good evening. My name is Barbara Dodson, and I live on Marchmont Drive. I would also like to encourage you to submit an alternative ballot measure for the June ballot. I hope you will submit such a measure. Like Jeff said, I think this ballot measure should simply restate.
Ms. Dodson, can you speak closer to the microphone? Thank you.
I think this ballot measure should simply restate what the council previously approved for the Albright site. I am very concerned that voters will approve the current ballot measure without recognizing how it diverges from what was approved. People are very busy. The report may alert some people to the differences, but I'm afraid most people will approve the measure because they will think they are supporting the schools. I think the only way to make clear to voters that the ballot measure is in fact different is to provide the alternative measure. Putting the two measures side by side in the voter's pamphlet is the clearest way to highlight the differences. The developers are likely to send beautiful and highly misleading flyers to everyone in town. People opposed to this measure do not have the deep pockets needed to provide equally compelling flyers. According to the Los Gatos Weekly, just to get their measure on the ballot and in an effort to undermine town governance, the developers spent more than $250,000. Please help preserve appropriate oversight of town projects by submitting an alternative ballot measure. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Doug McNeil.
Good evening. Doug McNeil, 17413 Pleasant View Avenue. I'm a charter board member of the Los Gatos Montessorino Police Foundation. I was elected one term, and I've been part of that board for 7 years now. I joined the board. I was honored to join as an invitation by the chief, also due to an incident involving my family and neighborhood. One of those times that all of us think, this could never happen to me. My wife and I moved here 16 years ago for the schools, community, and a safe place to raise a family. One morning I awoke to an intruder in my backyard on our property. Our motion detector lights went off, and at the time I didn't know what was back there. I'll just say that we found out later it was a methamphetamine addict. He was bleeding from head to toe. He was carrying a weapon, which also doubles as a pry bar for a window to a home. After the intruder fled my yard, he moved to my neighbor, a mom with 2 daughters. Husband was on travel. The early morning hours in our neighborhood that morning were awoken to breaking glass and screams from my neighbor. I bolted out the front door to her house, where we quickly called the dispatcher, and quickly, as the intruder entered the yard, saw us standing out front, heard us calling the police, and fled the property. The Los Gatos Montesino Police Department arrived on the doorstep in 90 seconds. With the canine unit, we were told to shelter in. 50 minutes later, we heard a siren on University Avenue, and he was apprehended. Due to the well-trained workforce, professional staff, and teamwork, the intruder was taken off the street. The critical piece of this whole story is that the response was key. Rapid assimilation of information, a quick action you get from a community-based police department. This event made me a believer in community versus county or outsourced policing. 30 minutes after he was apprehended, I walked back to where the intruder first set foot on my property, and we found a shiv, or basically a weapon, near my daughter's back bedroom window. When you evaluate options, please ask yourself, could this ever happen to me? Please ask yourself, with the investment we're making in this police department and what we value the most in our community is community-based policing. Ask yourself, when this happens to me, will the police department be there? Community-based policing was the answer for my family and for our community, both Los Gatos and Montesino. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is John Shepherdson.
Good evening, John Shepherdson, 120 Oak Rim, Mayor Leonardis, and council members. We are in a fight right now to save our town from a hostile takeover on the Albright project. Town sovereignty, the N shouldn't be up there, but the town of Los Gatos operates under a council manager form of government, a system that combines the policy leadership of you all in the form of a town council with an appointed town manager. The structure is the town council, town manager, and staff. The developer's ballot measure. This is in their ballot measure. The primary administrator of this specific plan is the town's community development director. So we're shifting the power away from you to the community development director. This, in my humble view, is an attempt to take over how we run our government. It's one thing to seek approval from the council in terms of what you want to build. It's another thing to alter the decision-making process that takes place to determine if that project should be approved. This is more language. If there's ambiguity that arises concerning the appropriate classification of a particular land use, the director shall have the authority to interpret whether the use is similar to one or more other uses permitted by the specific plan. Do we want the developer to fundamentally alter our government land use decision-making? The solution, a counter-ballot measure that affirms our town's oversight. We have new information. The traffic is worsening. We know that from the San Jose Mercury news article. San Jose's traffic has gone from 13th worst to 5th worst in the country. I'm missing the F there in feasibility, but the feasibility report that was supplied by the developer was flawed. And now the developer seeks to reject your approval. So the proposal to keep this sovereignty of the town and keep the Netflix buildings, cut the 2 floors off the other 2 buildings. This brings money to the schools, to the town, and the developer will make lots of profits. And this is the EIR best land use according to the town's EIR report. This will result in less traffic, no garage, and it will protect views and privacy. So join us in saving our town by opposing the hostile takeover. Here's a phone number for those that would like to join us. And I suggest that the town could offer 2 ballot measures in addition to the developers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shepherdson. Next speaker is Len Pacheco.
Good evening, Len Pacheco, Hernandez Avenue. I have a few comments about the North 40 project. The North 40 proposal by Grosvenor is perhaps one of the most thoroughly researched and publicly aired projects to come before the town. As a town resident, I have followed the project with great interest and attended all of the public hearings over the past years. It appears that no stone has been left unturned. There might be a few pebbles that have rolled by, but overall, it looks to me like due diligence has been performed. On tonight's council agenda, I see the North 40 specific plan is scheduled for completion in the spring or summer of this year, according to the strategic goals and prioritization schedule. How fixed are these dates? Will they slide? My hope is that the council will do all that it can to place a high priority on this significant project to keep it moving forward without undue delay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pacheco. Next speaker is Deborah Weinstein.
Deborah Weinstein, Tate Avenue. I just wanted to say three things. First, I wanted to thank you again for all the work that was done in 2013. I knew it pushed a lot of other priorities to this year for developing the regulations on the commercial sale of firearms. And being a resident of Almond Grove, I'd really like to pitch this street improvement plan. And I know it's on schedule. I just want to make sure that we are continuing that on the plan. It's way overdue. But lastly, as I was a member of the group that met for, I think, 3 years for the North 40, I would really encourage that we continue that process. At this point, it looked as if that was scheduled for the summer, but at this point, many years and much work has gone into this plan. The process was revised throughout the middle part of it to make sure that it was on course with the town's goals for that area. And you can't make everyone happy, but I believe that it was a good balance at the end of commercial and residential that was specifically for senior with a low impact to the Los Gatos school system. So if you could please keep it going forward, we'd all really love that we spent 3 years doing that and that it actually gets somewhere. Thank you.
Thank you. That was the last speaker card. So are there any others? Seeing none, we will move on to our closed session report.
Yes, good evening. Prior to tonight's regular session or special session, council met in closed session to discuss real property transactions. The property discussed was 4 New York Avenue, 110 East Main Street, and 208 East Main Street. As to all three of these property negotiations, no action was taken that requires reporting under the Brown Act.
Thank you. So tonight's agenda includes our strategic goal planning, and I'm looking to staff to describe the process of how we will go about doing this.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the council. I would like to call your attention to the fact that we do have a desk item that includes some communication from the public. The council has been adopting a 2-year strategic goal matrix for since 2010. And the strategic goals on the matrix represent priority issues that the council wants staff to focus on, in addition to our ongoing core services, which represent about 80% of our staff resources on an ongoing basis. Staff is suggesting that the council first review the status of the 2013-2015 strategic goal matrix and specifically discuss whether the staff's recommendation to remove the completed goals be followed. And you may then also ask questions of staff about the status of any of the other goals. Then Greg will, the town manager, will address the proposed council and staff issues and seek council direction on potential adjustments to the strategic goal matrix, first from the list of potential new projects and then from the current work plan list. Before we begin with the 2013-2015 goal matrix review, I'd like to ask Matt Morley, the Public Works Director, to provide updates on 2 of the items on that matrix.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. Matt Morley, Director of Parks and Public Works. Quick update on a couple of items that we've had some progress on and continue to work on. On the complete streets item, we continue to look to incorporate this into our projects. Sorry, I lost track here where it was.
Fourth column, fourth line.
And you'll discuss the assessment that was prepared regarding the town's general plan.
Yes. So we've had an assessment that we worked on that shows that our complete streets program associated with our general plan is in line with VTA requirements, and had a consultant that provided that information to VTA, and VTA was able to confirm with us that our general plan did meet the complete street requirements. As you see additional projects come forward from staff on various public works, you should see some cross references there to our complete street efforts.
The installation and use of traffic speed monitoring signs.
Thank you, Pamela. So we continue to look for opportunities to install traffic monitoring signs. In fact, I had an inquiry today from the city of San Jose who wanted to partner with us on the installation of a sign on Blossom Hill. So although we haven't been extremely active in the last year and found needs for them, they continue to be an important part of our traffic program. And our traffic calming programs as we look for opportunities to continue installing those into the future. I'm available for questions should there be any.
Questions from council? Councilmember Brzezinski.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is actually related to both of those, and I don't know if this is the time in our discussion to take up these two issues, but from the complete streets policy that we've indicated as completed, I think that there are a number of items. In fact, there was an individual who works with VTA who offered a series of specific actions that could follow from a complete streets policy. And I would like us to address that, take that up, not necessarily tonight, but to put it on our agenda, because I'm not really comfortable with the completed indication here, because I think we have hardly touched the surface or even started into the implementation of the Complete Streets program, because there are so many things that need to happen in relationship to making our streets more pedestrian, bicycle friendly. And also it ties into the second issue that regarding the monitoring signs. If there's any issue that our community talks about as having impacts on our quality of life right now, it's about traffic and speeds of traffic, traffic volumes and speeds of traffic, both in the neighborhoods, on our arterials, throughout the town. As pointed out, there's been this huge increase in vehicle traffic as a result of the rebounding of the economy in Santa Clara Valley. Fully 25% increase in number of vehicles on the roadways in the last year because of the fact that we're such a great driving part of the economy. And we notice it every day coming over the hill from Santa Cruz, going back over the hill on 17, coming down 85 from Sunnyvale, Mountain View, all the way through town, the bypassing of the freeway when it's completely stopped in the afternoon on the arterial streets. I think it's a major issue, and I think this is something we have to take up and not assume that we have accomplished whatever we need to accomplish to mitigate the traffic that we are observing, particularly in the zones, the areas of our schools. I think there's no question that we need to pay close attention to this. There is nothing, that, as far as I'm concerned, that has more risk to our community than traffic and the speeds and the volumes of traffic. Fortunately, as commented before, our police department has done a great job of developing community policing interface with our town. We don't have drive-by shootings. We don't have a lot of the things that occur in other communities because we have such a great law enforcement organization. But we do have the potential impacts of traffic that can turn out to be very, very problematic for us. So I put this out there as something that we need to address specifically about taking it from this point to the next point, which is actually significant implementation.
Thank you. Vice Mayor.
Mr. Morley, I have a specific question regarding the complete streets with respect to VTA. As I understand it, if the town complies with the VTA requirements for complete streets, then the town would potentially qualify for grants for various improvements in our infrastructure, street, et cetera. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Further questions? Thank you, Mr. Morley. Moving on to staff.
Thank you. Now I'd like to direct the council's attention to the matrix that appears on the overhead. It's also attachment 1 in your packet. And as I mentioned, there are completed items. There are 7 completed items and then 2 items that are partially completed. And staff is recommending that those items be removed from the list because they are completed. Hearing what Councilmember Przynski said regarding complete streets, which is listed as completed because the policy was actually completed, I believe that the town manager can discuss that, the next steps, the implementation, as a potential issue for council consideration when we look at the new issues. And then we are not recommending the speed monitoring sign program to be completed and removed. We do see some next steps on that. So with that, and we also have a list of the completed items that could be put on the overhead. So we've pulled the completed items out. They are on in your staff report on page 2 as well, and these are the items that have been completed. And we ask for council's concurrence or discussion or other suggestions regarding the completed items.
Thank you. Councilmember McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. I had a question on the, I even hate to bring up the word, but the firearm ordinance, because on our last meeting, in our sequence of meetings, I believe the council assigned the subcommittee to come back together and do a review through everything and clean up the language. Is the thinking of staff that is a minor task and therefore doesn't rise to the level of a strategic goal, and that's why it's checked off as completed?
We completed the task that the council established when it was put on the goal, which was the land use regulations and the firearms retailer regulatory framework. Those have been done. We do have the follow-up work after implementing it, and just today we scheduled the meeting of the ad hoc committee to do that review. I'll be blunt, it's one of those projects that's on the bubble. If we think it's minor changes to the ordinances that have been adopted, then it doesn't need to be on the strategic goal list. If we were to be doing a comprehensive review and changes, which is not what staff would likely be recommending, then it becomes a bigger work project. I don't think we'll have a full answer to that till we meet with the ad hoc committee. For now, staff is comfortable it being an ongoing work assignment and not reflected on the strategic goals list, and we could report back to council if that occurs differently.
So if I might, just as a follow-up question, so taking that specific question up a level into more of an overview question, as we go through the evening and talk about a lot of projects and ideas, maybe you could talk, Mr. Larson, a little bit about how you view the difference between a strategic goal that qualifies for one of our very limited boxes that we have here on the chart and work assignments like the subcommittee or development projects, involving an appeal from Planning Commission or an application involves alcohol that automatically comes to council. just, those don't always end up on here. So how do we balance those or keep those separated in our minds as we go through this?
It's a constant challenge of managing the organization, and it's why staff strongly supported the council's embracing of the strategic goals process during the midst of the recession, when town resources were declining and work wasn't necessarily declining. As noted on the strategic goals matrix, most all town resources are used for day-to-day service delivery, and we have obligations to respond to 911 calls, to process applications or permits as they come across the counter, to have the library open and available with books on the shelves for our clientele, and to manage the finances and personnel of the organization for the delivery of those services, as well as maintaining parks and streets. And those are the ongoing core services, which the council, I think, has rightfully put at the top of the chart as the priority. These strategic goals become those special initiatives that are kind of one-time efforts that available staff discretion is used for. That's typically work done by management staff or led by management staff. And as the management structure has shrunk over the years of the recession, that's become increasingly compacted. What we're asking the council to do is to look at all the tasks before the town and to join staff in managing them. To get to specifically answering your question, the ways the strategic goals become real is through the scheduling of items to the council, which with then Mayor Spector, staff started a matrix which you've seen and is attached to the report, because what we found during the last year is we can typically only have one or two major items on a single council meeting. So conditional use permit, or excuse me, code enforcement update for CUPs has been delayed since last November due to higher priority items on the council agenda, which then forces the alcohol and entertainment policy to move back as well, since those two are intertwined. So one tool staff and the council use under the mayor's direction is scheduling of council meetings. How do items get on the agenda so we meet your policy of reasonable meetings for public participation? Second area is the schedule we're now going into, which is the capital budget and the operating budget. Through your allocation of resources and your decisions on the strategic goals matrix, we'll define where staff allocates resources through the CIP and the operating budget program. Third opportunity is just for staff to raise when there may be conflicts. I think we did that with the 9212 study that the council adopted last week. That was not on any strategic goal. When the council dealt with the strategic goals, nobody had an idea there might be a ballot measure coming before the town or a need for a 9212 study to balance that. Staff articulated in the staff report that given the 30-day window, would supplant other priorities and workload, particularly for CDD, manager's office and the attorney's office, and we're trying to minimize those impacts through use of outside resources, but there's still a management and oversight responsibility as well as so we deal with it a bunch of ways, through the council scheduling, through the mayor, through budget, both the capital and operating budget, and through staff identifying for council when there will be workload impacts to the strategic goals matrix.
Thank you. Vice Mayor.
Thank you. Would you remind me whether, when I look at the matrix, either in front of me or up on the screen, are the boxes under the 2013-2015 strategic goals listed in order of priority, or are they all equal?
There is no priority listing.
And my second question is a follow-up to Councilwoman McNutt's observation that we have limited boxes. And I was going to ask, are we limited to 5 boxes under each one? Or can we make as many boxes as we want?
The council can obviously do what it wants with the matrix, either reducing or adding boxes. It's the strategic goals matrix that town staff tries to implement your priorities. Adding or deleting boxes doesn't increase or reduce staffing and resources to get the work done. It simply would put more in the pipeline to then be considered over the 2-year window.
just one more follow-up to that. So we have in front of us 6 columns and 5 squares under all of them. Then we have a sheet of other things to discuss. And if we take some things off completed, we move them theoretically onto the strategic goal matrix. So what happens with these 20 or whatever other ideas and proposed issues for council consideration that we have in front of us?
I was going to mention when we got to that portion of the agenda that staff believes all of those ideas are probably worthy ideas. This is not really, for many of the ideas are worthy ideas of pursuit, but it's a scheduling of priorities and which will be done first. That's why it's a 2-year strategic goal framework, and every year you update it for the next 2 years, so it lets it constantly evolve. So I would see those items that are not moved to the strategic goals list could be considered in future years at future council retreats as workload may be available.
Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. At this point, I'm going to move to recommend that the completed projects be removed from our 2013-15 strategic goals. And to clarify for the record, by completed projects, I'm referencing those printed in red on our attachment 1 and also previously depicted on a blow-up.
Vice Mayor.
I second with a question, hopefully to the maker of the motion, with respect to those that are listed as completed that we've discussed as having some ongoing issue either with implementation or cleanup, if you will, for example, the firearms regulations or the complete streets. Is it intended that when you indicate that we remove them, that they may just move to a different agenda level but not be at the strategic goal matrix?
Yes.
Then I'll continue my second.
So we have a motion and a second. Do we have further discussion? Councilmember Brzezinski.
Yes, I'd like to reinforce what Councilmember just said. I want us not to lose the important things that we have as our direction. I don't know where exactly these things move to maintain the significance and priority, but that we adopt this motion with the intent that we have accomplished this specific task, but we have not accomplished the completed goal. And that's where I want to make sure that there's no loss of those things that we say we're attempting to do. Because in some cases, these completed tasks are basically ministerial. We're completing something that we've been obligated to do, such as consult MTC for financial benefit or whatever. But that would be my concern, and I believe that's what Councilwoman Jensen was referring to. And so where would those things go when we move into the next phase of actually creating or developing the operational component?
Well, as the manager said regarding the firearms, I think depending on what the ad hoc committee decides to do, the level of review and changes, then that could conceivably rise to a strategic goal. So that is yet to be determined on that one. On the complete street, I heard you offering perhaps a next step regarding implementation of some specific VTA ideas. And the town manager has captured that on the list of proposed items, and we'll bring that forward at that time.
And if I might offer another example how staff approached it. In the first column of community character, the third box, we said adopt AHA's emergency shelter zoning and multifamily CUP policies as required by the housing element. A year ago, the council asked us to make the strategic goals specific, tangible, achievable, so we know when they could be checked off. So that's why that one's listed as completed. However, on the possible issues, we have housing element update as required by state law. If we had left it as a general housing policies box, there wouldn't be any change at this point in time, but reality what's doing is you set explicit targets for us last year, which were the AHAs and emergency shelter zoning. That's been achieved. I believe you're likely going to set another explicit target for us, which is to comply with state law regarding the housing element update, and staff would recommend that be added to the strategic goals. So that shows you an example of how we see these morphing and evolving over time.
Appreciate it.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you. In the same vein, so under fiscal stability, the third box down regarding evaluating the impact of the parking assessment district, on our alternative sheet, if you will, for council consideration, there is facilitating parking issues. So by eliminating the box that says we evaluated it, we're not eliminating the idea that we need to deal with parking, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And when you consider the proposed items, you can put that back on the list.
Okay.
Further discussion? Seeing none. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? None. Passes unanimously.
Does council have any further questions regarding any of the statuses?
Councilmember McNutt?
Thank you. I just had one, and that was because we had some questions here tonight, and I already had it earmarked. But could you review the timing on the North 40, the EIR, and review of the specific plan?
Community Development Director Sandy Bailey will respond.
The environmental impact report is in process now. We are anticipating that the draft EIR will be completed end of February, beginning of March. And then it'll go through a 45-day review period.
So end of March, so April to middle of May, then it goes to Planning Commission?
Yes, there'll be two hearings by the Planning Commission. One hearing is where they just take comments regarding the EIR, and then the next hearing will actually be on the EIR and the specific plan.
And that's how we end up with summer?
And then it'll go to council.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So moving on to the next part of the meeting here, we have a list of documentation or ideas for future council consideration.
Right, and the town manager will frame that discussion and seek your input on how to proceed.
So attachment 3 to the staff report, which is also being put up on the screen, is a list of issues for possible consideration by the council to add to the strategic goals matrix. They have been categorized by the columns that are on the strategic goals matrix, and I will highlight the items in black have been proposed by the mayor and council. Items in blue have come forward from staff. These are issues that we will be asking the council to consider which, if any, get added to the strategic goals matrix for the next 2 years. And what staff will be looking for explicitly is two things from the council. One, which items are there a majority of the council believe are high enough priority they be moved to the strategic goals matrix as one of the town's top priorities for the next year to two. And second, for most of the items, to get clarification from the council on what is expected. As I mentioned earlier, a year ago, the council made the wise move to have the strategic goals be very explicit and achievable. And rather than just having project titles, which is what many of these are, we think it would be helpful for the council to provide clarity on what they actually expect for those items that move to the strategic goals matrix. That will help staff assure that we're able to meet your expectations and deliver what it is you request. I do ask the council to keep in mind that we do have our resurging economy, as was mentioned earlier, that is increasing workload throughout the town and town organization. We are still on a constrained workforce size that we used over the recession to avoid layoffs and service reductions. And in particular, I want to highlight that the Community Development Department is facing the brunt of that most significantly, where they face a number of issues that are already on the strategic goals list, many issues that are on the proposed list, as well as a workload of just incoming applications, be it North 40, Hillbrook School, Twin Oaks, Knowles and Capri project, the former county land, just a variety of work that's coming in that's really up in the 80%, but it does tap the management resources of that department, the attorney's office, and my office to oversee those. So in particular, I would request the council to be cognizant of the workload pressures, particularly of CDD, but the entire town organization, I believe, is facing that as well, particularly given extensive management turnover late last year and early this year. So with that, Mayor, we wanted to propose at the council's discretion, we could either have council members highlight issues that they want to focus on and we'll record those, or we could go section by section. So it's really the council's preference to go by council member or by section, and then staff will do as we always do, try to recap back where we think there's a majority, and then to seek clarification on what it is the council wants added as a strategic goal.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. I have a question from Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question, which will dovetail into a response to the manager, is that we go through the sections as identified here in bold letters, i.e. community character would be first. Within that section, I would have several questions before we get into a discussion and input or motions. So if it's okay with the mayor, may I ask the questions under that section?
I think that sounds like a very organized approach, so go ahead.
Let's get an organized person here. All right. To the staff then, you have smoking ordinance, and I see what your explanation is, or your explanations are. So is that the limitation of this smoking ordinance as you see it evolving?
This is actually a council-originated possible item to add to the strategic goal. What staff has listed is just the array of possible things the council could direct staff to look at if it were to be elevated to a strategic goal, from smoking restrictions in multifamily housing to increased restrictions in outdoor seating areas, or to moving forward with a tobacco retailer permitting. Staff is not recommending any of those at this point in time. If the council were to move this issue up to a strategic goal, we would be asking, if a majority of the council wanted to move this up to a strategic goal, we would be asking you which, if any, or something altogether different you would like explored as part of that strategic goal.
All right, along the same line then, I would assume that the suggestion as to sign ordinance doesn't have any specificity. It's just come to us as a recommendation relating to sign ordinance. Is that correct?
We actually received two council comments, one regarding that. One was to look at increased education of the business community, so there would be self-enforcement and self-application of our sign laws, to possibly a revision of standards and rewriting of our sign ordinance. So those kind of represent opposite ends of a continuum as reflected to staff by council.
Is the rent control ordinance there because it's something that is mandated, or again just placed on the list by a council?
Council-initiated request.
And then with regard to the two items in bold that you said were placed on the list by staff, why would we include housing element update since it's required by the state? I mean, I understand why we need to do it, but why would we put it on a list for consideration?
Because as much of anything else you might be adding to the strategic goals list, it will be a user of town staff time and resources, and staff would reverse the question that to ensure compliance with the law, it should be on the list of strategic goals to make sure it's given the attention it's due.
All right, and the same thing with regard to the zoning ordinance for home occupation permits. Is that an issue that is a mandated item?
I will defer to Community Development Director Sandy Bailey for an update.
Yeah, this item is to implement state requirements. Right now, our town code is not consistent with state requirements regarding cottage food operations for a home occupation permit. So this would just be amending the town code to be consistent with state requirements.
And then as a follow-up question, do we have a deadline to comply? Are we past the deadline?
We are past the deadline, and we're following state law.
All right. Thank you very much.
Further questions on this section? Vice Mayor Jensen?
Just have a general question in looking at the boxes, the leaf blower, single bag use, plastic bag. So by eliminating the single-use bag, we're retaining the leaf blower and polystyrene, correct? So it will just now read differently to target those things, correct?
Yes, I should have mentioned, following your direction tonight, both on the deleted items as well as any you choose to add, we will be bringing back to you, as we do every year, a revised matrix for the next 2 years where you can review the actual language.
Vice Mayor?
Did the manager or the mayor want council members to then make comments with respect to those items in that first group? Because I would be ready to do that.
Yes, in an organized fashion, perhaps we can go from right to left. I don't know if that helps.
That's fine.
Starting with Councilmember Brzezinski.
I appreciate the mayor's direction on this. First of all, just a general comment. As I looked back at those issues that we've had for this 2-year sequence, we still have a number that are either pending or in process. And I have a kind of a macro orientation that we not increase significantly the number of issues we have to tackle, given the fact that we haven't completed our homework at this point in time, and that we have a lot of things on the plate. So that would be my caution, that if there is something that isn't pressing immediately or seems requiring some kind of imminent action, that we consider how the impacts will be on the capacity of staff and the capacity of our completion of the things that we've already got on our plate. As I look at the community character issues, I don't see anything that is completely pressing other than those ones indicated by Ms. Bailey that are state law that we have to implement immediately. And they seem, again, ministerial, so they should not require an awful lot of time of council. But those would be the two that I think we should complete because they are state requirements. As far as the others go, I'm not inclined to focus on things that would require us to go out and enforce ordinances that may be out of our control. Some would call it the nanny state, where we're starting to try to engage in behavioral interventions in things that, for example, multifamily housing, where it's been done in other communities, but I think it begs the question of whether we're going to respect our community and their adult ability to make judgments for themselves, and at the same time not be able to enforce it on our side because most of these things are unenforceable. So to educate rather than to attempt to intervene would be my orientation to each one of these particular issues at this time. And I think I'm inclusive of all of the other bullet points except for those two that are state law.
Thank you. Vice Mayor.
I agree that we need to comply with state law. So I would substitute the housing element for the AHOZ that we have in the third box. But I would specifically include, since staff indicated they want particulars so that they can check the box, if you will, to facilitate our new housing element advisory board and committee, and working with that because that's going to be essential, and it will take staff time to do that. With respect to the zoning ordinance, I had the same questions as Councilwoman Spector with why we were dealing with it, so I would just be specific, update home occupation permit to comply with state law with a due date, if you will, and hopefully that's can be done quickly. And I would put that on because we're already behind, so we need to do it. With respect to the other items, the smoking ordinance, I don't see that as nanny state. I see that as a health issue, but I can see why we wouldn't put it on our, given the definition I understand of the strategic goal boxes, I would not raise it to that level. The sign ordinance, I think, should be a back burner, if you will, a high priority on this other sheet, because if there's one thing that I hear about besides traffic, it's among others, the signs, in particular trucks that are parked on Los Gatos Boulevard with signs on them. And we've recently had a couple of enforcement issues with signs that don't comply with our sign ordinance, which is why I think education is important. And if the education was done correctly, we wouldn't hopefully have those problems. The rent control ordinance, I could see not prioritizing. The consulting architect, I will confess, is my idea, just because I think it's someplace where the town can actually save time and money, where applicants can save time and money, where we've built another layer in that's become a gating item, and people take it as if the town architect says that it's good, it should be approved, or they change designs that might have been a desirable design to start with, and we're passing a lot of that cost through to applicants, but I still think it'd be a good idea for us to really reconsider it, because I think when you get a gating item that becomes entrenched, it doesn't help anymore. It actually performs a disservice to the planning role. So those are my observations.
Thank you. Mr. Manager.
If I could respond to one item that Vice Mayor mentioned regarding the sign ordinance. We also have another council-initiated item. It's the third one under quality public infrastructure, which may link to one of the issue you were focusing on there, which is regulation of on-street vehicular sales and advertising, and to deal with that issue, which we've all heard complaints on.
Thank you. So it's my turn, and when I look at the strategic goals, I see a number of things that are going to be completed or are completed, a number of things that are in progress targeted for spring and summer of 2014. And it seems like quite a bit of what's on the current matrix will be disappearing or perhaps resolved. And so I see opportunity there to be proactive and add a few things. And that's why I have to confess I came up with the smoking ordinance review, the sign ordinance, and the rent control ordinances. And to me, the smoking ordinance is something that we all need to be paying attention to. When you look at other communities, it is a public health issue. It's not a nanny state thing, although some might view it that way. The sign ordinances, I get complaints about signs all the time. And the rent control ordinance, it's been a long time since that's been looked at. There's been some members of the community coming forward and discussing issues with that on a regular basis. So those are why I wanted to take a look at these things. Whether they have to be put onto a 2-year plan on a strategic matrix or not, I'm not entirely certain. They might be things that we can just agendize later. So I'm looking for clarity on that. Moving on to the consulting architect, the housing element update, and the zoning ordinance amendment. I support staff's recommendations on those, as well as what the other council members have said so far. And again, looking at the amount of things that may be going off our matrix, looking at this being a 2013 through 2015 strategic goals, I'm just looking for clarity of, should these things be agendized at individual meetings, or should they be on the matrix? So that's a question, I suppose. Maybe you can
Yes.
answer for me.
The strategic goals process is not intended to constrain public or council consideration of issues of importance to the community. It's really to prioritize staff time and council time so that we are making sure we are dealing with those long-term issues that could otherwise constantly be put off and never attended to, that the council has said are their highest priorities. So I think what we are looking for is clarification from the council, which of the items are the highest priorities that should be reflected on the strategic core values and matrix goals for the next 2-year cycle that will hopefully drive staff and council time and attention. It doesn't mean other issues like the 9212 study, when they come up, we'll say, oh, not on the matrix, we didn't know about it last year, we're never going to consider it. That's the reality of your lives as council members, and this is just a tool to support you in those efforts. However, staff will use this for our planning and organizing of the use of staff resources and the development of the budgets and the work plans for the next year.
Thank you. So since it's a queue of work, essentially, I support all the items in that first category, especially being that I recommended 3 of those myself. And I just assume eventually, if we get those in the queue, that we will find time to hear those. And that is one council member's position on that. Thank you. Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With regard to each of these sections, I have my own paradigm, my own matrix of how I'm going to look at it. First of all, I don't think there's any one item that has been put on this list for consideration that is a bad idea. Everything here is a good idea. However, we have limited time and limited availability. And even though we may be removing things from our matrix as having been completed, we know not only with the 12 study, but the 9222, and with the initiative coming up and with the North 40 coming up, which is a multi-step process, all of these things are going to be this year, and they're going to be time-consuming. So to the extent that I am going to suggest these items not rise to the top of my consideration, it is definitely not because they are bad ideas. I agree with what has been said, for example, that a smoking ordinance or consideration of smoking limitations is a health issue. In that first section of community character, definitely go forward with the housing element update and the zoning ordinance amendment as state mandates. And the only other one that I would suggest we go forward with, but not at the top of our list as a priority, is the consulting architect. And for me, I will tell you why. I think it's come up most recently with the Planning Commission. And what I see with them is if an application has gone to the architect and the architect says, I like it, then the Planning Commission seems to be wedded to the fact that they have to like it too, and the applicant thinks that he or she has a green light, whereas if the architect says no, then the Planning Commission seems to think it's a no, and the applicant seems to think it's a no. So I'm beginning to feel as though there's just too much maybe not power, but perceived power, and we should take a look at that role one more time.
Councilmember McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. So I also want to, just as an overview statement, say that for me, determining the priorities for tonight is going to be very limited to those that I think rise to the highest level of urgency. I can't tell you how hard we worked this last year under Mayor Spector to try to get these things checked off. And that was her goal for the year, was to clear out this matrix. And it didn't happen. And it wasn't because council didn't work hard. It wasn't because staff didn't work hard. It's just the way of public process. And I mean, we heard tonight about the timing on the North 40. Everybody would like to get the North 40 moving along, but the EIR takes so long, and you have legal time that it has to be out in circulation, and you have to schedule the meetings, and it goes on and on. Another good example is the entertainment policy. My goodness, we've been talking about that as a high priority for over 2 years. I remember we had an application situation in here about a year ago, anniversary, and we reassured them that the entertainment policy would be approved by end of summer. And now it's February, and now we're looking at summer, and we meant summer of last year. Now we're looking at summer of this year. So what I really would like to have as our priority for this year are not any specific projects, but finishing up things as much as we can that we've already identified, keep the new additions to a limit, have the goal of having a lot of empty blanks on this chart for next year, and then kind of take a breath and start fresh with a new set of strategic goals. So given that, to me, in the first section here, the community character, I think the two that staff has indicated that are actually required by the state, the housing element and the home occupation, definitely need to be on there. I was not inclined to the review of the role of a consulting architect until I heard some of the comments from council tonight. And I do see, and I do remember the conversation at the Planning Commission and with applicants that those kinds of assumptions are being made. So I think I would probably roll that one in as a third one off of that first section to put on the list. And remember, this is a 2-year list, so it gets it on the list for sometime over the next 24 months.
Thank you. So, Mr. Manager, we'll get a recap on everything.
I'll get here's what we took as our notes. Every member of council agreed the 2 state required items should be moved onto the strategic goals list. And it was either 3 or 4 members of council explicitly mentioned reviewing the role of the consulting architect. So it's a majority in either case that said that should be moved onto the strategic goals list. I heard 3 members of council speak to interest in the smoking ordinance as a health issue, but I didn't hear a majority say move it to the strategic goals list at this time.
Councilmember Brzezinski.
Yes, I don't disagree with anything that's been said, but I do want to make a couple of things clear. When we talk about the consulting architect, it seemed like it's not an issue of whether the architect's doing a good job. It's a question of how the Planning Commission interprets the advisement given by the architect. And so, I mean, to me, when we established the consulting architect, it was to solve a problem. And the problem was that people were doing design from the dais. And the individuals doing design from the dais were not themselves architects, but they were attempting to evaluate the quality of an architectural design in front of them. The consulting architect that we brought on board was purposed to be able to give a professional orientation in this analysis, but never intended to be the final word. So I think it could be simplified as not a wholesale review of the consulting architect, but a focus on the role and how the Planning Commission can appropriately interpret that role. And I'm thinking simplify this as much as we possibly can. As far as the smoking ordinance goes, there's no question this is a health issue. There's no question that we did some really significant things once upon a time in terms of restrictions around playgrounds and restrictions around the civic center and restrictions in restaurants. But I'm a little concerned about expanding those restrictions to areas that we may not be able to act as the enforcing body of. And so I would recommend, again, more education. And I think in our society, you see education is taking place because we're well aware of the impacts, the health impacts of smoking. I myself am not a smoker. I certainly don't want to be sitting in a restaurant where someone is outside smoking. It doesn't please me, but at the same time, I think that there are other methodologies that we can use that are in our society right now to impact that. In terms of the sign ordinance, I think it's more a question of enforcement. I think the sign ordinance is pretty clear. I would not want to see us look at rewriting the standards. So again, simplify what is the issue we want to deal with here, and I think it's enforcement. And sometimes that goes to some kind of punitive enforcement if we're not getting cooperation, and we know a particular example of where that's happening. So those are my comments, and I hope that as we move forward, that these things can be simplified rather than complicated as we attempt to achieve what we're looking at here.
Vice Mayor.
I have a process question, I guess. Number one, does the mayor or the manager want a motion with respect to those things that have been identified, or is a summary of consensus adequate?
This is a study session, but we are looking for clear council majorities to move items to the strategic goals. Right now, staff records that as being the last 3 items on the list.
Okay.
And if the council feels that is not an accurate summary, then it's probably best to move to a motion format.
Okay.
Vice Mayor.
So this council member thinks it's an accurate summary. My other process question is, would it be appropriate when we get to the end of our discussion to maintain, if you will, a backup list that is these proposed issues for council consideration of the things that don't make it to the strategic goals, but we maintain as items that we want to prioritize when we get that opportunity?
Yes, and I think that happens by the very nature of your discussions, particularly since the mayor chose to have it here in the chambers so they would be televised and recorded. So as much as we know on the last 2, we had unanimity. The third to last one, there were 4 council members that spoke to it. The smoking ordinance, there was only 1 who thought it should move immediately to the strategic goals list. 2 others, though, clearly expressed they thought it was an important health issue. So I'd say that's kind of next in the pecking order when we have capacity to deal with it.
Vice Mayor.
So my question is, I understand and appreciate what you've said, but can we formalize that in some fashion so that we have this discussion tonight and we get to next year and we forget it, or we don't have the same ideas? So can we have a formalized secondary list?
That it would be very helpful to staff, because then we would know which items to bring forward in a year and which ones not to bother bringing forward. I think that would be a helpful process.
And would that be appropriate for a motion, or?
It's always appropriate for a motion because that provides clarity to the public process.
Okay.
I would, without a motion, view it that we had 3 members and even a 4th to a varying degree speak to the importance of smoking enforcement or regulation as a health issue. And that's what I would take right now as being the one the council would have on the next up list.
So then I would like to make a motion to eliminate from the first column, the adopt AHA's box and replace it with housing element update as required by state law to include facilitation of the Housing Element Advisory Committee, and add updating the zoning amendment for home occupation permits to comply with state law. And I don't think I have another box for consulting architect unless I can take the 2015 targeted completion date of the general plan implementation, which is for next year, and put that on the next up list, which I would propose, and replace that with the consulting architect, and keep the smoking ordinance and sign ordinance on the next up list that I'm going to call, but not include rent control, because I did not hear any members of the council other than the mayor discuss it. So that's actually intended to be a motion.
I just have a couple comments. You had indicated earlier in the meeting, is there any limitation to the amount of boxes that could be in the columns? And the answer was technically no. So if you needed to add a box for, say, the consulting architect, then that could be added. So.
And that would be fine, and if it's appropriate to keep the general plan on and add a box, then I'm fine with that.
Okay. We have a motion. Do we have a second? Councilmember McNutt.
I'll second with a comment, and that is that our focus should be on setting priorities and goals and not on worrying about how it's going to be presented in a format, because that is something that staff will figure out, and there may be some columns that only have 2 things and some might have 6. So I think my comment earlier about a limited number of boxes was really talking about a limited number of resources in all possible ways. So if we'll take the focus off the boxes and stay focused on priorities and goals, then that's a great, I'm seconding that motion. I think it captures our discussion well.
Councilmember Spector.
I'm not certain I'm going to be supporting the motion. I may be asking staff for clarification. I don't mind having the smoking ordinance and sign ordinance as next ups, or whatever the maker of the motion called them. However, I am not, the explanation that follows the smoking ordinance and sign ordinance on our sheet here, I would not personally want to necessarily get into all of those sub-issues. And so that's my concern about supporting the motion. And if I might ask a question of staff?
Yes.
Mr. Manager, if smoking ordinance and sign ordinance are next ups, would staff view those as encompassing all of the explanatory language that follows the word smoking ordinance and sign ordinance?
I would view the next up list, as the Vice Mayor has called it, and using the smoking ordinance as the example, as those list of items that would next come to council for consideration of moving on to the strategic goals list. And at that point in time, the council would be asked to provide clarification on what is it you would like done. Is it simply education, or is it tobacco retailer permitting?
All right, thank you.
That you would make that decision then.
All right, then without a scope being part of the motion, I will be supporting it.
Vice Mayor.
As the maker of the motion, I just wanted to indicate that it was my intention that we would have a generalized description, smoking ordinance, sign ordinance, and then determine exactly what that would mean once we got to it. And I also appreciate Councilwoman McNutt's idea that we don't have to have a particular number of boxes, but that we're prioritizing. And so that is fine. I just want to make sure that we get it in a motion form.
Councilmember Brzezinski.
And I'll support the motion with this clarification, because I think we have to be very careful of creating a wish list, because it strikes us as significant, and not have the actual impacts on staff time and personnel, and not take the explanation behind the title as if that's the direction that this motion is moving in. That to me is really significant. So I agree with also Councilwoman McNutt's concept that we're not looking to fill boxes or eliminate boxes, or we're looking to come up with what is the plan that we want. So with that, I will support the motion.
Right. So we have a motion, a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. Passes unanimously. Moving on to the next section.
Well, the next section should be easier. It's good governance, and there's 2 items, one from a council member and one from staff. This is now turning into a dual election year for the town of Los Gatos. There has been public discussion regarding campaign ethics previously. That is a potential item suggested by a council member. The item from staff is to update the technology priorities plan and to move forward with council digital packet implementation. And that is a little bit of a blending together of 2 issues, but we do believe that once the council packet is made more accessible to council and staff digitally, it'll also be available to the public, and it supports council goals of transparency and engagement. So those are the 2 items before you.
All right. Thank you. Councilmember Spector.
Thank you. Within this section, I would definitely support the technology priorities and digital council packet. Those are issues that have been under discussion by the policy committee, Ms. McNutt and I, for at least a year, maybe more. And I think they are things that need to be addressed by this council, not only whether or not we want iPads instead of paper, but how to deal with the community's use of our technology equipment. As far as the discussion of election campaign ethics, I don't see discussion as a priority kind of item. And with regard to campaign ethics, unless I hear something differently, I feel that issue is addressed both in our council policies and also very extensively in state law.
So I'm going to start with Councilmember Brzezinski. We'll move right to left again.
Okay.
My right to left.
Thank you. I would like to say in terms of the technical priorities, I think it's really important that we spend a good deal of time, and this should be a significant issue for us to address, because as we go to an electronic communication model, I think it opens up the possibility that and has been reflected in other jurisdictions, where suddenly when we're moving from paper to the electronic monitor, there's a temptation to begin to do things that actually remove the transparency. So now I get an email from some of my constituents who are watching on television and saying, you better be doing this. And that wouldn't happen with our face-to-face audience, because we're in a dialogue in this point. And I think that it would be very important for us to look at best practices in other agencies. How does this work? How do you protect yourself from the violation of the purity of the public process? So that would be something I think we need to look at very carefully. In terms of discussion of election campaign ethics, I do think it's necessary for us to do that. I think it may be a discussion based on just those things that Councilwoman Spector indicated, that there are certain campaign expectations that exist within the FPPC rules, within our own council policies, and I think it's appropriate for us to review that at this point in time, because we have theoretically 2 significant elections coming up. So I would support both of those, but I don't see the discussion of the ethics, if it's strictly a discussion, as something that we move to the priority list. I see this as an agenda item that we would focus on in a very expeditious time frame, given what's coming up in the next couple months.
Vice Mayor?
I agree with moving the technology to the priority, although as Mr. Larson knows, I'm not an iPad fan. So it's going to be hard for me, but I'm going to try my best. I have a difficult time figuring out what value it would be to use staff time to discuss election campaign ethics. I agree with Councilwoman Spector that they are more than thoroughly governed by the Fair Political Practices Act. So I would not even put that on the next up list, and I would move the technology to our priority list.
It's my turn. I will support the technology's priority, and the campaign ethics could be handled in another forum, I think. Councilmember Spector, if you want to go again.
No, thank you.
Councilmember McNutt.
Thank you. Yes, I enthusiastically endorse the idea of getting our council packets done electronically. The big selling point for me when Councilmember Spector and I had our demonstration last year was that our entire binder would be page numbered. So instead of having to find item 5, attachment 3, exhibit A, page 4, that it would just be, look at page 283, and everybody on council and staff could find it quickly. Everyone in council chambers and watching at home could find it quickly. And I think it's going to be just a huge boost to transparency and understanding of what's going on both sides of the dais. In terms of the election campaign ethics, this is something that I've talked about before. I know we don't have the time or the resources to do a full-blown election ethics program as they do in the best practice cities like Santa Clara. But I did think that what we could do is have something that would not require a lot of staff time, but a discussion on council and maybe some kind of some guidelines or principles or a pledge or something where council could model behavior and principles, expectations that we would hold for the community on how they would conduct themselves in campaigning ethically. I don't think it would be, again, a big drain on staff time, and there's an awful lot of material out there available from other cities that have placed ethics as a priority.
Right, so summary. Oh, Councilmember Brzezinski.
I also feel that even though the materials are available to us and we've all been through campaigns before and we don't have a community that has a history of inappropriate electioneering, and we certainly don't have a community that is electing its political leaders on the basis of how much money you've got to put together your campaign, because the small community that we have and our ability to communicate to that community is a fairly constrained environment. But I do think that ethics is a very important thing. We have to continually evaluate. That's why we have our semi-annual ethics expectation that we go through to remind us of the issues of ethics that are appropriate to government. If we think that we don't have to do that, then I think we're violating some basic tenets of how good governance occurs. I would recommend that, again, this is not a topic for our matrix, and I don't see this as significantly time-consuming, but I think to say that ethics has no, or ethics evaluation, ethics education in terms of elections and campaigning have nothing to do with what we're attempting is really counterintuitive. And my sense would be that we would go ahead and access those documents, whether it's FPPC, our own policies, what we're seeing in state law, what maybe the Markula Center says it's observing, and refresh our memory. I don't think that would be something that would be inappropriate whatsoever. And so I would not want this to be discarded as one of the issues that we have in front of us.
Thank you. Further discussion? So staff, summary of what you've heard?
Well, clearly, the technology priorities plan and digital packet for council meetings unanimously moves to the strategic goals list. Only think I heard one member suggest the election campaign ethics might be on the strategic goals list, but heard two and possibly third, if you include the mayor, saying that might warrant discussion in another forum or at a single council meeting. So right now, staff would come back to you with only the second bullet on the strategic goals matrix.
Okay, thank you. So look to council for a motion. Vice Mayor.
So my motion would be to adopt the summary as indicated by the town manager.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? I'll second the motion. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 4-1 or unanimous? Okay, unanimously. Thank you. Okay, so moving on to fiscal stability.
So we have 5 items here, but 2 are actually variations of the same one. So if I may explain, the council will recall we have a news rack ordinance that's just in the C2 downtown zone. One proposal from council was to expand that town-wide. I'll jump down to the blue ones now. We have regulation of food trucks. That's not a recommendation from staff. It's just an issue we had highlighted from council. I believe it was a year and a half ago when we had food trucks coming to Music in the Park and other special events, then it might be an issue the council wants to look at. We do have periodic requests for food trucks that come in now. They're currently regulated under our peddler's permit, which gives them 90 days only in certain configurations and places in compliance with that. And then we occasionally allow them, when appropriate, through a special event permit. So if the council wanted any change to that, many cities are grappling with this issue. I'll just say if we wait another year, we'll probably have some best practices out there from other jurisdictions. Zoning ordinance amendments to expedite certain application processes and reduce application costs. This was a prior council referral that has not been acted on, so we're just recasting it back to you if you wanted to elevate it to a strategic goal. And then the second bullet and the last bullet both deal with downtown parking supply. Last April 1st, the council, when looking at the downtown parking assessment district and policy, directed staff to support efforts, but that it should be a private sector-led initiative to come forward with a proposal for a garage or a continuation of the parking assessment district. We've done that as we've reported to you. So that's why we said it was completed on the old strategic goals matrix. Staff was carrying that forward, that we would facilitate the privately led efforts that we believe are now underway to look at future parking opportunities. And another member of council suggested the town could consider taking the lead and funding that new parking structure and being the leader of the effort. So those are the options for you here.
Okay. Councilmember McNutt.
Thank you. I had a question on 1, 2, 3. The fourth bullet, the zoning ordinance amendments. I have no memory of that conversation. So what does that mean? What are we talking about there?
I think it was 2 budget approvals ago when we had a fee increases. We discussed ways to expedite some planning processes, and some of those were to have certain CUPs be able to be approved by the Development Review Committee. Those are like CUPs that are typically a consent item for like small exercise studios, dance studios, yoga studios. And the other was for time extensions, to have those be approved by the Development Review Committee. If right now projects that are approved by the Planning Commission, if they need a time extension, the thought was to have the DRC be the deciding body.
Thank you.
So, further questions? Moving right to left, starting with Councilmember Brzezinski.
I don't know if I like this role at this point, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I guess the question I have on the news racks is, what do we have to do to implement this? Because we already have the policy for the downtown. And would it be anything other than just extending that policy to the entire business community? Because it is basically the boulevard that we're looking at, and north of Highway 9 on North Santa Cruz. Could you clarify that?
Yes, Councilmember, you probably recall, I know because you were real interested in this before, that there was an extensive outreach effort. It did take quite a lot of staff time to contact all of the providers and inform them about the new policy, ask them to apply to use the news racks, get their permits. So you're right that the framework, the foundation is in place. It would, however, take an effort of town staff. Previously, it was our code enforcement officer. We now have the contract code enforcement officer working. So we don't have that person anymore focused on code enforcement. So it would take an effort of staff to expand that. Townwide, it would also take additional funds. We used redevelopment funds to purchase the other news racks that would need to be built into one of our budgets.
Okay, with that, I think that certainly for me it doesn't rise to the absolute necessity of going to the plan. And it hasn't. We had the arguments that occurred to promote our developing of the news rack ordinance, specifically related to the downtown and the aesthetic impacts of the downtown and the sidewalk blockages and so forth. I think we accomplished that in the downtown very, very well. I don't see this as a necessity, given the issue of how much we do have on our plate. If we want to save this as an item, but I wouldn't recommend that we move that forward to anything that requires us to do action at this time. In terms of funding of the downtown parking structure and the privately owned efforts to address parking supply, I think to facilitate the efforts, that is the staff's bullet, is our appropriate role. I am not convinced that we should fund another parking structure for a lot of reasons, and I think if we were to actually get to that discussion, it would be significant that we look at the values of what we can do within our own resources, such as what I believe happened in the last discussion, which is how do you maximize the availability of parking through the expansion of the valet parking program, and how do we fund that versus what we would have to do to fund another parking structure, and what would be the funding source for that in relationship to the private environment. So I would say I would support the latter, but I would not be interested in taking the leadership and funding for a downtown parking structure. Okay, therefore it leaves the other three that the staff is proposing, and I'm assuming that those would be able to be implemented or put into our process. But how significant is this regulation of food trucks? I don't know. I don't see this as a big deal or anything that's impacting us now. So I'm very ambivalent. I don't see a lot of fiscal benefit to these proposals.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you. The one thing I would move up to strategic goal would be the downtown parking. And I would advocate some kind of amalgamation of facilitation and exploration by the town of the cost of a parking garage, or to address at least parking options, if that were to include valet service, whatever it was to include, so that we would have information going forward. And it's become a significant issue with the parking district expiring. I think we definitely need to address it. So I think we need to be in a position that we're doing more than having outreach meetings, which I think are successful for where town staff attends, but I think there has to be something more than that. So if facilitation covers that, okay, but I think that it should also include considerations of parking options for the downtown. That may be a garage, that may be valet, that may be lots of things, but by moving it to a strategic goal, I think those should be explored. The news rack ordinance, I think, does not rise to a strategic goal given the costs that have been identified. However, if the council could easily expand the regulation to townwide or Los Gatos Boulevard or potentially North 40, then it seems like we might want to undertake that as a secondary kind of goal, my next up list. I don't see any urgency whatsoever to regulating food trucks, and having just got through regulating firearms, I'm not interested in regulating food trucks. Zoning ordinance amendments do not strike me as at all a priority, or I wouldn't even put them on the next up list.
All right. So the news rack ordinance expansion was an idea that I brought forward, and I just thought we could piggyback off of what we have in place already just to bring consistency throughout the town. I did not have a recollection of how it was previously funded, but I thought that the people who, or the vendors who displayed their newspapers in the racks were paying for those. We had a plan where they would pay us back. But those issues that we have downtown also exist on our Los Gatos Boulevard or on our Blossom Hill Road in those neighborhoods as well. So I think it's a beautification issue as well as a safety issue. I know over there by a certain burger stand on Los Gatos Boulevard, there are quite a few news racks, and I'm not sure if there's a lot of people walking, if they can even get by, or if there's somebody who's in a wheelchair. they could get by in certain instances. So to me, it seems simple to piggyback on what we've already put in place, especially looking at things like the North 40 going forward and other neighborhoods that might be developed. Regulation of food trucks, zoning, and those two don't strike me as being huge priorities. When I look at the parking garage and the town leadership of funding a parking garage, as well as the other bullet, facilitation of privately led effort to address downtown parking supply, I feel like this is one of those things where you have 50 people and you're going to have at least 51 opinions on it, and the guy from Harvard will have 2 opinions. I think that we need to bring town leadership into this, because I feel like we've really fallen behind on this. Now, maybe this encompasses the town bonding and funding a parking garage, and the parking assessment district reimbursing us. Maybe we explore a parking garage in the future that is a pay parking garage with more hours, as opposed to the 2 hour and the 5 hour, or the 2 hour and the 3 hour parking we have around town, which doesn't seem to be enough for a lot of people who are shopping in our downtown business district. So I strike this as being very important to our fiscal stability moving forward. So that is a big priority for me. Move on to the Barbara, Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To start this easily, is that there's nothing that has been listed under fiscal stability that I would put on the priority list. The one caveat relates to parking. It was my intent last year to have a first step where the parking issue and the bonding was explained to the council. That happened. And then there was a second step where the town staff facilitated a parking-related meeting. That has happened. I think at this juncture, the parking issue has to be overseen and controlled. I shouldn't say controlled, overseen and directed by the private sector. And I think that's already happening in part with the Chamber of Commerce. If the council has a motion to put some type of parking issue on the prioritization list, I would support that motion. But other than interfacing but personally, I think we should be interfacing with the private sector.
Councilmember McNutt.
Thank you. The only one on this list that I think qualifies as a strategic goal is the last bullet, which is the figuring out how to maximize the downtown parking supply and facilitating the private enterprise in that discussion. I do think that town has to be involved in those discussions, because without town presence, and I have not been to any of those meetings, but without town presence, I would bet that a lot of the time would be spent by property owners and businesses saying, well, why can't the town write a check for $20 million for a new parking garage? Or, well, how much does it actually cost? Or, they would have a lot of questions, and they would flail around and get even more frustrated than they are. So again, that's the only one to me that qualifies. And since, once again, I'm at the end of the row, I'll go ahead and make the motion to elevate the facilitation of private-led effort to address downtown parking supply to the strategic planning matrix.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Seeing none, we'll call the question. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? None. It passes unanimously.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. We're halfway done. Quality.
Mr. Larson, I was going to ask you, in the interest of consistency, we had previously discussed, adding things to the
next up.
The next up list. So I don't know if anything in this category, if you wanted to do your summary, if anything would fit that category.
Now would be an appropriate time if a council member wants to move something going on to the next up list. The item that had the most discussion beyond the garage was the news rack ordinance expansion, which would either could be a next up item or a low work item if it's possible to do that.
Vice Mayor.
I'd make a motion to put the news rack ordinance as a item that we would have on the bottom of the secondary list if there was staff time in order to implement that. The expansion of the ordinance seems to me to be not that complicated. The implementation seems to be more complicated. So
we have a motion. Do we have a second? I'll second that. So I'll call the question. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Passes unanimously. Moving on to the next topic. And
so 3 items suggested by council prior to this night's meeting, and then 1 item suggested earlier in the meeting. So the 3 items are listed there: the tree ordinance, the update of the heritage tree definition, and 25% trim regulations. This came out of a prior council discussion of a specific project, and I have since heard from 3 council members an interest in this moving ahead. Consideration of school transportation services, funding and impacts is a suggestion that came from a council member. We've now heard earlier tonight and previously different members speak to increased regulation of on-street vehicular sales and advertising. Staff would add with a likely referral to Transportation and Parking Commission for review. And then the other one that came up during the course of the discussion on the matrix was to develop and present a complete streets implementation plan.
thank you. This time I'm going to start with Councilmember McNutt and go left to right.
See, whining gets you what you want, right? You get to go fast. Okay. So I had a question first, actually for the town attorney, regarding the on-street vehicular sales and advertising. We've been complaining about this for some time, and a lot of times the answer we've gotten back is there are constitutional rights there. So is there any point, do we have anything we can do? Is there any point in putting this on the list, or is First Amendment tying our hands, so why even bother?
First Amendment will tie your hands as to the vehicular sales. You have other ways maybe to look at the issue. If there's certain areas that are problem areas, and the way you handle that is through parking, either through no parking or through limited parking more than it is right now. So you look at it from a specific area type and not do it as a vehicular sale issue, because those are First Amendment rights.
And if I might add, following just along what the town attorney has discussed, staff currently, when we get complaints and even periodically on roughly a quarterly basis, flyers, parking vehicles or trailers that are typically on the boulevard, and we have 3 code sections we're able to cite. One is the unauthorized signage, which may have concerns that the attorney just referenced. We also do inform those people that they are doing business according to the town business tax code, and they're required to have a business license. And then we also have the 72-hour parked vehicle or abandoned vehicle regulation. So we do try to notice those when they occur of all 3 potential violations, knowing that our ability to enforce on each of those 3 varies. So what this item could be morphed into is either a more aggressive program along that line, or as the attorney and the council member who proposed this suggested, looking at prohibited parking on the upper boulevard, for example, from 2 to 4 in the morning. And so it would prevent the 24-hour parking of vehicles, which does seem to occur there. But that would have to go through the Transportation and Parking Commission per your normal practice.
Okay. So then my comments I do think if there are things that we can do, then I do think that trying to deal with the signage on cars and trucks and trailers parked here and there all over town would be something that would be beneficial and a strategic priority for the next 2 years. The tree ordinance, I've never quite figured this out, because if you can cut 25% every year, you do the math, the tree disappears in a certain amount of time. So I think we do need to look at that. Complete streets implementation plan, I do think, is a priority for all of the reasons that Mr. Przinski outlined earlier this evening. School transportation services, I think, is the responsibility of combination of the schools and the parent community, and I don't see the town having a role in that.
Councilmember Spector.
Thank you. Tree ordinance, absolutely, using Glen Ridge as an example of what we don't want. Agree with the exploring options for the vehicular advertising and the complete streets as Mr. Przinski described.
So for me, I requested the tree ordinance be put on here because of the previous comments made. The consideration of school transportation services goes beyond just driving or dropping off your child at school. I thought it was important to address this issue moving forward because the schools get very crowded in the morning, and it causes an overall impact not just to the parents dropping off, but to all the citizens of Los Gatos and the traffic. And I thought we might be able to put our heads together and come up with a creative solution, working in conjunction with the school district to try to find a way to better service the residents. Regarding the regulation of the vehicles parked for sale and advertising, I concur with the 2 to 4 a.m. or whatever recommendations might be put forth by the Transportation and Parking Commission. Vice Mayor.
Thank you. I agree with respect to the tree ordinance. I agree with respect to complete streets. I agree with exploring options for regulating vehicular sales on street parking. I agree with the mayor regarding school transportation. Councilman Przinski talked about traffic impacts in town, and overwhelmingly they are created by school traffic. So if we can participate in some kind of discussion on how to alleviate some of that, and if that includes a bus, then I'm for it. And I understand that the school is going to be the one to do the bus, but there's no reason we can't talk to them about that or what other options that we might have.
Councilmember Brzezinski.
Well, I think we have unanimity on this. I would say in terms of the tree ordinance, as I understand it, the ordinance allows for a 25% removal, and then 25% of 100%, then 25% of whatever 100% is. So actually the tree never disappears. It just becomes really, really small, I think. But definitely we have to deal with the tree ordinance. And as far as the advertising and sales and so forth, I think we need to pull out all the guns on this one, because it is a nuisance. It's a significant nuisance. If you just look at the boulevard, basically from Los Gatos Almaden all the way up to, well, just past Lark, it is a used car sales, a linear used car sales lot. And some of these things stay there all the time. Sometimes these guys take them home at night. But, it seems strange that we don't have the ability, or we're not at this point acting as aggressively as we possibly could. I think that if we need to have parking restrictions, and that's the way we do it, and then we enforce it, then that's what we need to accomplish. I don't know if you can say no parking from 2 a.m. to 1 a.m., but I think that we need to take a very strong look at that. As far as the transportation services for schools, I think this is something we have to aggressively deal with in terms of the district. I know that the schools, the high school in particular, issues parking permits to any student who wants to drive to campus, not on the basis of the number of parking spaces available. And I think that it's time for us to up the ante on this, because it becomes gridlocked if you're on Main Street when school is coming in, going out, or during lunch. And, you know, as a firsthand observer of the boulevard and what happens during school, I mean, it is absolutely impossible to actually move. Now, I guess that's traffic calming that we see there, and it does protect the kids in some way. But it's time we really handle this because it's a major issue. So whatever we can do, if you put all four of those things down with the context of what we're putting in, then I think that would be appropriate. That would be my motion.
So we have a motion by Councilmember Brzezinski. Do we have a second? Vice Mayor?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Seeing none. Oh, Councilmember McNutt.
I guess I'm going to vote no on the motion because I'm only supporting 3 of the 4. So I just want staff to understand the 3 of the 4 that I am supporting, but I'm going to be voting no because I don't think that the school districts are going to have a lot of time and interest in having that discussion, and it's going to set up expectations that will disappoint everybody. So that's the background on how I'm going to vote.
Councilmember Brzezinski.
And I don't disagree with your point of view, Councilwoman McNutt, but this is an issue we've been dealing with a very long time, and they are a separate governmental entity. They can do what they want, and we know that. I have full expectation that there's probably no ability to provide a bus service, but when I see transportation services in our evaluation, that means how do we deal with the problem that is generated by the schools because they exist in our community. And so that's why I would include it, but I appreciate the concern about them not cooperating in the venture.
And I would like to elaborate on Councilmember Brzezinski's comments. It goes beyond just a bus. It's complete ideology about the transportation services, and perhaps it is a bus, and perhaps it's not paid for by the school district, but it's in conjunction with Valley Transit Authority or something to that effect. I'm not making any promises, but it's just a matter of discussion at a future time. So to the town manager we go.
And this is one that staff did try to list an array of options, from services to town funding to understanding the impacts. The more clarification we get from council, since so many of you support exploring it, on what you're looking for staff to do as the tangible outcome. Is it simply a discussion with the school district? Should we put money in the budget to fund a bus service? Where's the council going?
Vice Mayor.
Well, from my perspective, I see it as an exploration of all of our options. No, I don't think we should put money in the budget to fund a bus service unless we know what the school is doing. I think there's several options out there. One is actually having the school issue parking permits only for the spaces they have. One is, I know that the schools have tried carpooling to no avail. I know how my kids were when they were going to school. But I think that we need to have all the information that we can to try to deal with the problem. And I don't think it's, we don't have to know what the impact is. We know what the impact is. So we don't need a study about that, is my view on it.
Just going to add a couple more comments. And it could be something as simple as painting the bike lanes green on Los Gatos Boulevard, especially in the school zones, because I know a lot of children walk, ride their skateboards, their scooters, their bikes to school. So I know there's a big emphasis on that. So back to Mr. Larson.
We'll see what language we come up for the strategic goals matrix. You'll see in a couple weeks. Civic enrichment. Down item
Excuse me, we actually haven't had the vote yet.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimous. Oh, passes 4-1.
And staff did record your notes. Civic enrichment, there are 2 items presented to council. Downtown Vintage Car Show came from the council member, and then establishing Friends of the Park came from staff as something staff has long wanted to do. And prior to all the items being added right up above, which are in the same department, we thought we might have the capacity to focus on that this next year. Most of the items up above in the quality public infrastructure are on the street side of PPW. The Friends of the Park is on the park side of PPW. It may still be possible to achieve all, but we look for council discussion and direction.
So this time I'm going to start, and then I'll move right, and then we'll move left, just to keep it exciting. And the reason I wanted to start on this is because I hear from people in the community all the time, how do we get more liveliness in our downtown? Why don't we put on more festivals? Why don't we close the streets? And one idea that I had was a vintage car show. I used to enjoy going to those when I was a kid, and I know Saratoga does one in conjunction with the Lions Club every year in their downtown. So it was just an idea. It may or may not be a something to add to our council strategic matrix, but it would be an idea of some events we can have moving forward in conjunction with service clubs and such that would bring more vitality into our downtown and more entertainment and good times for our residents. So that's where I am with that one. The Friends of the Park, I think, is a fantastic idea. Then we'll move on to Vice Mayor.
Thank you. I concur that we should try to be doing things to make our downtown more lively. I don't know if a car show comes to the level of a strategic goal. I would put it on a next up list as an idea and see how much interest there is. I am for putting the Friends of the Park as a strategic goal.
Councilmember Brzezinski.
Yeah, we've done these vintage car shows before. This wouldn't be the first time. I think last time we did it, we took lot 4 and we blocked it off. Then they brought their cars in, and the only problem with that is that it took all that parking out, so that when people came to park, they didn't have a place to park because there were all these vintage cars there. Even before that, before they arrived, it was a blank lot. So from the logistics perspective, we'd have to know how to do this. And we've also done it in ancient history on North Santa Cruz. It has a value. It certainly is not a strategic goal. It's something to be considered when we're talking about the the ambience and the enhancement of the downtown business community. As far as establishing the Friends of the Park, I think that it's really important to do that. I see this as very valuable for neighborhoods, for neighborhood interaction, for neighborhood organization. Not different than, let's say, Neighborhood Watch, that same concept. I don't know if it belongs to the town to do that, or if it belongs to the neighborhoods to initiate that. That's a question I would put out there. But as far as a concept of the neighbors taking responsibility for their parks, they're the ones that are there. They see it. They might see kids who are coming in, tag in. They might see trash that's down there. They may have to give us a call and say, "Hey, get down to Live Oak Manor Park because there's someone attempting to burn down the playground materials," because that did actually happen one time. So Eyes on the Park, very good idea. People volunteering, very good idea. Who organizes it? That's what I don't know.
Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With regard to Friends of the Park, we've been tossing that around for some time. I think it is an excellent idea, and it is. I would put it on the goals, and I would refer it to the Parks Commission. Downtown Vintage Car Show, we have had them in the past. I don't see it as something to put on our strategic goals, but something that the mayor and or staff might want to pursue, and I'll be there looking at those cars.
Councilmember McNutt.
Thank you. I would not support either one of these going on the strategic goals, and I will tell you why. Starting with the Friends of the Park, I think it would be great if we had a Friends of the Park organization, but I think it needs to rise up out of the community. It needs to be an independent 501c3. It needs to define itself as to whether it's a group like a Neighborhood Watch, where they're going to go pick up litter or trim bushes, or whether it's a group that's going to raise money for additional amenities or additional maintenance for the park. I don't think that it is appropriate for the town to take the lead on creating that. So if the community cares about its parks, which I know it does, I think they should be encouraged to organize themselves, just as the Friends of the Library has done, just as the Police Foundation has done, and come together and do that. I don't see that as being led by town government. On the Vintage Car Show, the same thing. I actually think it's kind of funny to be talking about more vitality in downtown when normally what we get are complaints about there are too many people down there, they make too much noise, they leave too much litter, and there's no place to park anyway. So I'm not sure why we're worried about that. But that being said, if there wants to be additional special events in the downtown, again, I think that needs to come up out of the community, either out of the business community or out of residents who have an idea and they want to organize some kind of special activity or promotion. So I don't think either one of these warrant an investment of town staff or council time to pursue. If the community wants it, they can have it.
All right, so we're ready for a motion or a summary and then a motion.
I heard four members, well, three definitely and one possibly, say the establishment of the Friends of the Park should go on the strategic goals list. And then I heard three say the Downtown Vintage Car Show could be on the next up or something that occurs but not a strategic goal.
Councilmember Brzezinski.
I'd like to make a motion.
You may.
All right. I'm going to move that we consider both of these and move them to the staff for further evaluation. Not put either on the strategic plan, but have the staff come back to us with some ideas about how we could implement both of these in the context of the community taking charge. I don't think the Downtown Vintage Car Show belongs to the staff or the council. I think it belongs to the business community. They've done it before. They can do it again. And it does benefit them. And it is, I think it's really a neat thing to do. I've been to every one of them, and I enjoy them very much. As far as Friends of the Park goes, I'd like to hear the Parks Commission comments to this, rather than our take the lead and see what the Parks Commission says about how they might see this organized. And at a certain point, we can always come back and take another look if we get lots of support from the Parks Commission. That would be my motion.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? I'll second the motion. I like the idea of having the Parks Commission be involved with raising the idea of Friends of the Park. I also like what Councilmember McNutt said about it being an organization similar to Friends of the Library that has a community spirit that is brought forth by the people. But just putting the idea out there by the Parks Commission and seeding the idea, I think, is a good idea to move forward with that. And on the car show or whatever other events coming forward, I think it would be more of a matter at the staff level, just obtaining the proper permits from members of the clubs, the service clubs, and the business community. So we have a motion and we have a second. Further discussion? Seeing none. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? So passes 4-1. Councilmember McNutt dissenting.
And just to clarify, neither item was moved to the strategic goals, and staff will just deal with them in a normal process. We will have a discussion with the Parks Commission on their willingness to explore or lead initiatives to support Friends of the Park, and as vintage car shows come up from the community, we'll respond as appropriate.
Yes.
Public safety, this is the last item, unless the council brings up others. We have now two items, well, one item that came from council, which is a police department budget analysis. The scope is to be determined regarding that. Staff has outlined a range of what that could be. It could range from simply an expanded budget presentation that we do at the budget review, where the chief could present additional detail on the police department budget, and we could do something similar with other departments in future years, all the way to, as was referenced in the newspaper and by speakers tonight, to consideration of police services outsourcing or contracting out. On that last item, that was put on a budget priorities matrix for council 2 years ago, and the council had that in the bottom tier and said no further consideration of it. So staff has not done any exploration of police services outsourcing because the council was clear 4 years ago to not consider such. The two suggestions that have come from staff for your consideration is to pursue migration to regional communications and interoperability. This is a regional effort throughout Santa Clara County, and the town would be joining with other cities. And the third one is to expand community partnerships for crime prevention and response. This is the Neighborhood Watch program, the On Watch program, mobilizing and utilizing our next door neighborhoods and other tools to expand our community-based partnerships for crime prevention. And then last, we did have a discussion when going over the matrix on whether or not the firearms review warrants being put back on the matrix because of that scope of work, or just to bring it back to council after the firearms committee is met. So those are the 4 items for discussion by council, and what staff is looking for is as much clarity as possible on what the council would want to pursue, if anything, on these items.
Thank you. On this one, I'm going to start with myself again, and then move left, and then come from Councilmember Brzezinski to back to the middle. My reason for requesting, I use the word budget analysis, was primarily kind of like a checkup. Every 10 years or so we go to the doctor, some of us more frequently than that, but not necessarily a mission, which you heard earlier in the evening, don't outsource the police department to the sheriff. None of those decisions have even been considered or made or explored. However, discussion among the council here tonight is, I'm looking for some discussion among all 5 council members. With that said, when you look at the price of some departments related to other departments, there's a big disparity. So I thought perhaps maybe, and this is under public safety in our book, I would almost look at this as part of this is being under fiscal stability. What would make the most sense to kind of do an analysis of, are we spending the money most frugally compared to some other agents? How are they operating and how are we operating? And I thought perhaps the way to approach this may be to hire an outside consultant to examine, well, this is what this department does and this is what your department does. And they just bring the information forward and then we go from there. So that would be where I would be interested with this particular topic. I do support the 2 items that are the public safety, the migration to the regional communication and interoperability, and the expanding of the community partnerships for crime prevention. Because as those members of the public, and they were all in the police foundation, said earlier, we do have a great police department and we are a very safe community. And any way we can enhance that is very important to this council member. So that is where I begin, and I'm looking forward to discussion, starting with Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On this section, the 2 items put on here by staff, pursue migration to regional communication and expand community partnerships. I assume, from what I understand of those 2 line items, that they increase our police department's efficiency, and so therefore decrease cost. And with that in mind, those are no-brainers to put on our strategic goals. With regard to the budget analysis, it seems to me that there's never anything wrong with looking at a cost-benefit analysis, and I think that's what we do every time we go through the budget. What we may want to suggest is that when we get a new police chief, that we delve, or that person delve with the council into more depth and analysis of the cost and the benefit. So at this juncture, I wouldn't do anything, but I would suggest that later this year or next year, we may want to expand the cost-benefit analysis.
Councilmember McNutt?
Thank you. Yes, the two bullets that staff put on in bold, I agree, should be added to the strategic goals matrix. The firearms review, my take on that is to wait for the subcommittee to meet and come back to us and say, this is going to be a 1 or 2 subcommittee meeting process, and it's not a big thing, or we've opened a whole new can of worms and it's going to come back again and again. So we can always update this later. In terms of the police department budget analysis, I'm not sure why we've targeted one department. If we really wanted to do a cost-benefit analysis at some point, maybe we should do it across the board for all of the departments. I personally think that's not a good use of time. I think we're the best judge on the value that we're getting for the investment that we're making in each of the departments and the services that they deliver to our community. Should we decide to go in that direction for whatever reason, though, I would caution that we make sure that it is a fair comparison. I know Saratoga's been mentioned. I mean, to me, that's comparing apples and eggplants. I mean, they're not even in the same food group. You know, it's so different. So, and I know when we did this on library services a few years ago, it's the same kind of thing. You just have to make sure that you really have a fair comparison and take into account all of the factors that go into the kind of service that needs to be delivered and what the true costs are on that. So that is not a priority for me right now. So it would just be the 2 items that are in bold that the staff has recommended.
Councilmember Brzezinski.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of items. I also will buy in on the last 2 bullets. I think those are significant. I agree that as one of the members of the Firearms Committee, we will be looking at this. We have a date certain for our meeting, so it's okay for the council and staff to wait until we complete that process. I'm certainly hoping it's not a very complicated process. I'm certainly hoping that there are some just minor corrections that we're going to make. In terms of the other, I want to make sure we don't lose this traffic issue that I brought up earlier. I think that has something to do with public safety, but I think it's accommodated in what we've already said on the matrix. But I do want us to remember that we have to start looking very carefully at mitigating the traffic impacts that include speed of traffic and volume of traffic. That might call out more traffic enforcement on the part of our agency, more dedication of personnel to traffic enforcement as we move to attempting to make sure people know that if you come to Los Gatos, you better drive carefully and you better, believe in the speed limits as you see them. In terms of the other issues, I think that it is important for us this time around to take a look at all of our departments, not in a cost-benefit analysis as much as where are we now? And we have come out of the recession for the most part. We see we're not completely out of the woods yet, but we have done some belt tightening over the last several years. We have eliminated staff in each department on the basis of basically people leaving or not replacing them or are contracting some services. And I think it's time for us to take a look and ask ourselves the question, what are the services that we want to deliver that we're not delivering in each of these departments that really require us to take another look at hiring and attempting to accommodate the services that we feel we need that we're not getting. And I think that's a little different than doing a cost-benefit analysis. I think what it says is, what's the product we want to deliver? Are we able to deliver it now? Can we increase in some degree in each department those areas that we see are deficient now because we've been so good in the last several years in being good fiscal monitors. As far as the other issues, I certainly am not interested in outsourcing our police services. It would be kind of ironic. I thought Mr. Harris, who was one of the speakers earlier in the night, made an interesting comment, and I wrote it down. Outsourcing core competencies is a bad idea. And if there's any core competency that I think we can be proud of, it's our police services. There's no question in my mind that we are able, because of the extraordinary administration we've got, and because of the extraordinary members of our department who are delivering that service, that every member of the community that I talk to says, Los Gatos Montesino Police, top of the line. Wouldn't want to go anywhere else, and it would be so counterintuitive at this point for the council to say, but let's check out the SO. So I will not go there in any consideration, but I do think that that those things that I mentioned can be accommodated. And keep in mind this, in terms of the budget analysis, where are the services we may need to increase personnel on.
Vice Mayor Jensen.
Thank you, Mayor. The first blue bullet, we just approved execution of a new joint powers agreement for the interoperability. I can never say that. So I don't understand why we want to have a strategic goal of pursuing it, given that we're in the JPA, unless I'm missing something there.
I can certainly have the chief provide more detail. There will be a migration that will occur over 5 or 6 years to 2020, but it could certainly be accelerated with purchasing opportunities for new radios, new antennas, regional interoperability, using our new dispatch system, which is the same as Sunnyvale's, and having that backup capability. Chief, anything that you might want to add?
That's okay. So as I understand it, to me, it's not pursuing, it's implementing. And so I would be much happier if it was implementing as opposed to pursuing, because we're already pursuing it, correct?
We would be happy with that language as well.
Okay. I'm not as excited about the last bullet, but I understand that there's no reason not to pursue it. With respect to police department budget analysis, I agree with Commissioner, I always want to say that, Councilwoman Spector. There is, Councilperson Przinski said, quoted Mr. Harris and said, outsourcing core competencies is a bad idea. Not getting information is a worse idea. We should always have information. And a cost-benefit analysis is an informational tool, and we should have it. So an expanded budget presentation, yes, I think that's appropriate. Why would it make sense to call out a particular department? Because the police department, I think, is 40% or more of our general budget. So if we have that much of our budget going to one thing, it's reasonable for us to explore it, particularly given the time frame where our chief is retiring. It's a good opportunity to look at what we want, how we do it, what it costs, what the benefits are, what people like about the police department, what people may not like about the police department, what are the costs. Does it make sense, for example, to maintain our own dispatch as opposed to putting it all together? So there are reasons to get the information. So I am very much for getting information, and I don't see why this idea could not be integrated with the third box under public safety, which is conduct a mid-contract review and update of contract with Montesino. Since we're the Los Gatos Montesino Police Department, I don't know why we couldn't include a review of police department budget as an informational item. And no one is suggesting tonight that we are going to outsource the police department, but it's our responsibility to get information before we make that decision. So I think we should be open-minded to information. And we may conclude that the amounts we're spending are perfectly appropriate, they're what we want, or we may conclude that there's changes that we'd like to make. So I would like to see that incorporated into the third box, particularly since, as I understand it, there's some issues with respect to payments that the town thinks is due from Montessorino that we are not now getting. So that would be my observation.
Councilmember McNutt.
I would like to ask the council members who've expressed an interest in this report to be a little bit more descriptive on what information you're looking for that we don't already get in the budget, which is 2 or 3 or 4 dozen pages of pretty explicit budget report and how the money is spent within the department and what their service delivery is. I mean, we have all of those statistics in there. So what don't we know that you want to know?
Councilmember Brzezinski.
If I could just kind of tag on to that. I think in the last couple of years, we've done more of a cursory job in our budget analysis when we've had the analysis. I do remember once upon a time, and these are not necessarily happy days, but once upon a time when we had a couple of council sessions where we separated the CIP from the operating budget, and we did a pretty thoroughgoing analysis at that point in time. And maybe that's really, it's our responsibility when the data is presented to ask those questions that we feel are significant, that help us understand how the services that we're providing are being provided within the economic framework. And I would say that this might be an opportune time as we, again, head out of the recession and see ourselves looking at whether we are actually still living in a recession frame of mind, or whether we are looking in a hesitant but ongoing post-recession frame of mind. And so that would be my recommendation, is that I think the data is there, unless there's some other information that isn't contained in the extensive budget that we're given to analyze. I think it would be more on our part to be very serious in our interpretation and analysis of what we get in front of us when we come to that. And that's coming up in the not too distant future, is it not correct?
At the mid-year budget review, we hope to be presenting our 5-year forecast, which will give the scope of what opportunities and challenges we face over the next 5 years. And preliminary information suggests we'll have some of each, opportunities and challenges. So.
Okay. Thank you.
So the issue has come up recently with Montessorino and what they pay for our police services. And again, I look at this as kind of a checkup, an opportunity to check in at 10 years. And you need something to compare it to. Comparing it to ourselves or trying to drill out the details of what it really is based on only the information we provide to ourselves becomes very difficult. That's why I suggested perhaps a consultant. And it doesn't mean we have to take what the consultant says or the outside agency says and implement any action. It's just a checkup. What are we really getting? What are we really paying? What do other agencies do for this? Such and such and such. It can be quite detailed. And again, with the issue, when we talk about a fiscal analysis, or we're not just picking on one department, but this is a department that we do have a chief retiring, and it is 40% of our budget. And we do have Montessorino on our chart to review the agreement that we have with them. So it's an opportunity to perhaps take some action if the council sees merit. And again, I thought the idea of an independent consultant or an outside agency, should the council see merit in that, might be the best approach, so we could kind of just get a checkup and do an analysis at this point in time, because it's a whole lot different than perhaps previous time when the current department chief came in. And what will it look like potentially 10 years from now? That's what I would be looking for. So further discussion. Councilmember Spector.
Yes, even though I supported the idea of more information, and what that more information is, I probably won't know until we get the information and I'm able to analyze it and ask questions about it. I'm not prepared to suggest that we go with a consultant at this juncture. I agree with Mr. Przinski. It may be the opportune time now to look more carefully at the budget reports that we receive from the departments, including the police department, and then at that juncture I will determine for myself if I think I need more information and that additional information would be best presented by a consultant.
Vice Mayor.
I concur with Councilwoman Spector. I would very much hesitate to commit to a consultant or ask for a consultant at this point in our career when we are facing unexpected costs from an election and have already incurred unexpected costs from the election. I do believe that an expanded budget presentation, which goes into much more detail than we normally get, would be appropriate. And I, like Councilwoman Spector, would look at that carefully to see if there's other information that we do need and whether that needs to be obtained from a consultant or not. But I would not, at this point, want to commit to saying that a consultant is the way to go.
Further discussion, Councilmember McNutt.
Actually, I was going to go ahead and make a motion, and that would be to move, what do we change that word to? Not pursue. Implement migration to regional communication and interoperability and expanding community partnerships for crime prevention and response to the strategic goal matrix.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion. Councilmember Przinski.
I just want to remind us that we have had a discussion. I assume all of the comments we made will be evaluated. But I don't think there's anything that we've said here tonight that requires us to amend this motion any further.
I'd like to call on the town manager to kind of give a summary of what was discussed.
Well, there's a motion on the floor to add the last two items to the strategic goals matrix, and there's been a variety of discussion about the police department budget analysis. I've heard a majority state that an expanded budget presentation, which could be direction, not a strategic goal, would be appropriate. I have not heard any motion that would reverse what the council decided 2 years ago and authorize or direct staff to consider outsourcing.
So we have a motion and a second. So what was that verbiage that the Vice Mayor used? The list.
Oh, next up list.
The next up list. For the next up list, I guess we would include the expanded budget review. Is that?
I believe the budget comes to you, your second meeting in May. That's probably before you'd ever come back and deal with the next up list. So I think it could simply be direction to staff, separate from the motion, to prepare an expanded budget presentation from the police department, and that would not encompass consideration of outsourcing or use of an outside consultant.
So we have a motion on the table. Further discussion? Seeing none. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? None. Passes unanimously. At this time, is there any other potential strategic goals? Councilmember McNutt first.
Thank you. It wasn't another strategic goal. I think we're done with that. I hope we're done with that. But I did want to say what I thought I heard council talking about was expanded budget presentation, perhaps from all of the departments, PPW and others, and not just the police department. That we had kind of gotten away from that. So I wouldn't want to just single them out, but I'd like to hear a little bit more detail about what's going on each of the departments and what opportunities we might have to, again, enhance their funding or change their work plan to better align with their workforce at this time.
Further discussion or questions or comments? Mr. Manager.
Yes. Obviously, I looking to see if there's council concurrence with how Councilmember McNutt just summarized it. I also did want to highlight that you had 2 items suggested during your public comment, revising the zoning code and reviewing the demolition ordinance. I didn't know if the council wanted to consider those going on the next up list for future consideration or not.
I'm glad that you brought that up. The demolition ordinance, I think, could get a look-see, because I know recently we had someone come in on a property on Loma Alta Avenue, and the house was being demolished and rebuilt, and that seemed to be of concern to that individual. So, and I've heard other similar concerns from the community. So obviously we need a consensus, but I would be willing to take a look at that one. Vice Mayor.
I would also take a look at that. The demolition ordinance is sort of funny right now, because one of the criteria is whether the owner wants to keep the structure, and clearly if they're applying to demolish it, they don't. So one of the findings is pretty automatic. So it is worth a look on the next up list, in my mind.
Councilmember Spector.
I see the manager looking around. This is the demolition ordinance was definitely not something on my mind, but as I listen to the other folks up here, I would agree we can put it on a next up list.
Councilmember Brzezinski.
Is the manager's looking around? I don't think this rises to a significant level. There have been, I mean, whenever we have an issue with a demo in the neighborhoods, we're going to have people who have interest in doing demolition, interest in not doing demolition. I don't think our demolition ordinance really is not serving us well. There may be individual instances where it could use more clarification. We certainly could ask the CDD folks to give us an update on where that stands and where they have noticed the issues of conflict that we might want to address. But I don't see this as a major issue at this time. I certainly would want to be informed or educated on it, though.
Further discussion. Does council want to entertain a motion on this item? I would make a motion to go ahead and add that to the, I guess it would fall in the category of community character.
Staff had proposed it for next up, or are you proposing as a new strategic goal?
If it's on the 2 to 4 year or 5 year plan or whatever, I think I would put it on that plan.
Next up. Okay.
So I have a motion made by myself. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Councilmember Spector, we have a second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. And Vice Mayor.
Mr. Larson mentioned the changes to zoning ordinance, and unfortunately I don't think Ms. Quintana got to that, so I don't know what she was proposing be changed. So I'm not in a position to say we should add that, and Ms. Quintana knows how to communicate with us, and I'm sure she'll make us aware of what she's proposing.
And I just want to thank the staff for their thoughtful integration of all these great ideas, and the council for your thoughtful deliberation on all these ideas this evening. And with that, I think we adjourn the meeting.